Shalom, this is Levi Shore. Welcome back to Good Torah. We've got a really interesting shir for you today. It's Mashiach versus the New World Order. So I've heard a little bit about, in the Torah world, it's starting to come into some shirim I've seen on the internet, and people are starting to talk a little bit about New World Order, Illuminati, Freemasons, all that crazy stuff. So I wanted to try to do like an introduction to all this and put it all in a Torah framework and show people how this all fits in. And a little bit of history, the enlightenment, and how we get up to the days we're in now. And then hopefully this framework will give us some perspective, and we'll see, maybe we're very close to the days of Mashiach, and we're going to see how Mashiach is going to fight against this so-called, this New World Order, Illuminati, whatever you want to call it, and we'll see the root of it all in the Torah. All right, so let's start, let's start at the beginning of this all. So really in the Kabbalah and the more mystical text of the Torah, it talks about there's two competing forces in the world. So there's the Sitra Kedusah. So there's the side of Kedusha, of holiness and Tahara and the spiritual pure energy, which may be called, if you like Star Wars, may be called the light side of the force. And then there's the Sitra Achrah, the other side. And that's what you would call the forces of Tuma, the dark side of the force, the forces of Kishuv, of sorcery and magic. And we'll see how this all plays in. So, at the very beginning of the Torah, we see this conflict in Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. They have to make this choice. And they make a choice between the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life, which is the Torah itself, which is the blueprint for all creation, or this other thing called the Eitz Das Tov Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So unfortunately they made this decision, they eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and that kind of throws the world into the world we know now. We live in this world of knowledge of good and evil, and you see it in science and technology, that science can be used for good. It can create medicines, vaccines, and create good things for the world, or it can be used destructive, evil, like bioweapons, nuclear weapons, more sophisticated weaponry and weapons to kill, surveillance technology. It can be used to stop bad people from doing things, or it can, uproot the lives of good people. So all these things are the Das Tov Ra. They're knowledge, but it can be used for good and evil. And this is the central conflict of the world. So it's interesting because you think that the central conflict is good versus evil. But there's actually a dynamic that the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life, is where we want to take the world to. And that's where Mashiach's going to help bring the world into that. And that's actually a world of all good. So it's none of this balance of good and evil, but the complete eradication of evil. So what we live in now is a world of knowledge of good and evil, where there's good and evil in the world, and we're constantly choosing between one and the other. So the forces, so Hashem has created these two malachim, these two angels. So there's the malach, it's called the Yetzer Hara, and it has three roles. So we have thoughts that go through our heads every day, and we have good thoughts and bad thoughts. And these thoughts are put into our head by these two malachim. So the Yetzer Hara is putting evil thoughts, telling people to do bad. Usually, I want this, I want that. And the Yetzer Tov is putting good thoughts into people's heads, like, oh, you really should do this, you really should do that. Good things. Like the Yetzer Hara, I want to stay up all night drinking, I don't care if I have work or a test tomorrow. And the Yetzer Tov is like, you should really study, get a good night's sleep, do well on your job tomorrow, do well on your test, do good in whatever you have to do, and then you'll celebrate after. And that's the conflict between the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, the good impulse and the bad impulse. And we're constantly choosing, we hear these thoughts in our head all day, and it sounds like our thoughts, but they're put in there and we're choosing. And who we are is choosing the good over the evil. That's hopefully who we are. We're the people that are choosing the good over the evil. We're learning to embrace and listen more to the Yetzer Tov over the Yetzer Hara. So the Yetzer Hara has three roles. It has the role of the Yetzer Hara, which tries to tempt people into doing an Avera, Chas v'Shalom, transgressing the laws of the Torah. And then it acts as the Satan, the accuser, the adversary. And it accuses people in the Beis Din Shomaila, in the heavenly courts. And then Chas v'Shalom, if the Satan gets a conviction, his third role is as the Malach HaMaves, the angel of death, and comes in when someone, it's time for them to be nifter, unfortunately the Malach HaMaves, he removes, the neshama from the person. Okay, so the conflict in the world is between these two forces. The Sitra Kedusah, the side of holiness, which Mashiach is going to lead the world of that side. And then there's going to be a counterpoint, and there's the Sar Shel Esav, the Yetzer Hara, the Satan, and there's going to be this king opposing Mashiach, who's going to be called Gog. The Torah calls him Gog, and it's these two opposing philosophies. So as we start to look into world history, we can see that this battle has been raging a long time between these two sides. So it's interesting. So we see some amazing parallels in the Hebrew calendar, and then the same date in our Western Roman calendar, or the exactly corresponds to the date of the Gullus Edom, the exile of Rome that we're in right now. You see amazing parallels. So first thing, 1656 is when Hashem sent the flood, upon all the earth, and that's when Noah and the ark, and him and his family was saved with the animals. And it's interesting because in 1656 of the Western calendar, we see that Baruch Spinoza was put into Cherem. So it's when the Enlightenment, when the Western Enlightenment, we're going to talk more about this, started reaching into the Jewish world. So what exactly is the Enlightenment and Spinoza and all that? We'll get into that really soon. So in 1948 of the Hebrew calendar, Avraham Avinu was born. So Abraham was born. And we see in the Western calendar, 1948, it was a big date for the Jewish people. We see the state of Israel, forming. So it's an important date in Jewish history in the Western calendar, and we see somewhat of the ingathering of the Jewish people already starting. We see millions of Jews from all over the world coming back to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel. So in 1996, this is a very interesting one. In 1996, there was the Tower of Babel, the Migdal Babel. And one of the first, I think the first king of the world, Nimrod, after the flood, people were terrified of Hashem, and basically, they had this Yira Shemayim, and they were basically listening to what Hashem wanted. But this man Nimrod, he got the whole world to rebel. And there was only a handful of men that stood against him. So there was Shem and Aver, there was Ashur, who goes on to found the Assyrian Empire, and there was Abraham. And they stood against Nimrod and his plans. But what Nimrod did in essence is they were building some kind of skyscraper, and in essence it's an ancient United Nations where this crazy plan that they would all rebel against Hashem, that they thought they could be more powerful than this infinite being, and it's unclear exactly what they were doing, but they were building this huge skyscraper. I think Rashi said something about sending something into space, even like a satellite, or going into space. I don't even begin to comprehend, but if you look at clarity in the world, how can, even if all mankind, Chas V'Shalom, were to unite as they did in this Tower of Babel, how can you defeat an infinite being? And why would you? Why would you try to go against the Creator, who's giving everyone life, who gave the world the Torah to show the laws and how people can improve themselves and improve the world they live in, and it's the blueprint for the whole foundation. The Torah is the Eitz Chaim. The Torah is the tree of life, and it's the blueprint for all creation, and it shows mankind how we can fix ourselves, fix up the world, and head back into that Gan Eden state, the Garden of Eden state, make the world into the Garden of Eden again, and even elevate it to a higher level. So we see the conflict of the Tower of Babel in 1996. Now this is fascinating. In 1996, I think it was around that time, that the internet was released to the public. And the internet, it's interesting, because the internet definitely has all the markings of the Eitz Das Tov Ra. It's knowledge. It's knowledge for sure. You have all this information, the information age, but it's good and bad. You can have, good information. You can learn Torah on the internet. You can learn about medicine and healing. And Chas V'Shalom, people can learn how to do bad things on the internet. You can learn about Averas, and so we see a parallel again in 1996. So there was a machlokus if it was 2018 or 2023, but I believe it's 2023 is going to be the correct date. So it was either when Abraham was 70 or when he was 75, he made the bris bein habasarim. When Abraham actually made the covenant between himself and Hashem, and then eventually between the Jewish people and Hashem. It's the beginning of it all. And it was on the 15th of Nisan, it was on Pesach, Passover, and I think it was the year 2023. So that was an amazing year. So 2023, which we're rapidly heading up to, as we're in 2020 right now. So 2023, the Hebrew calendar, it was interesting. So it could be the year that the bris was made between Avraham and Hashem. And could this be a marking of maybe the time of Be'ita? There's two times when Mashiach could come. Be'ita, Hashem has some planned time in its time. Could 2023 on Passover be the time of Be'ita, the final time when Hashem will just bring Mashiach? And then we have the Achishena, where we want to hurry it up. So through Teshuvah, through us wanting Hashem to send Mashiach, we can make it earlier. But could 2023, this year of the Bris Bein Hasarim in the Western calendar, could it be Mashiach? Now it's also interesting. In that year was the war of the 4 kings and the 5 kings, when Lot, the nephew of Abraham, was captured, and Abraham got in the middle of this war, and that is when he rescued his nephew Lot. So could that war, in the Hebrew calendar of 2023, could it be some major world war that we're heading into, possibly one of these wars of Gog and Magog? Now also interesting, and that year is when Abraham actually moved to the Eretz Canaan, as it was called at the time, and it's now called Eretz Yisrael. And could this be a simon that this could be the year of the ingathering of the exiles as we head to 2023? Could it be, as miraculous it would seem right now, that all the American Jews and the Jews of North America, Canada, South America, all the Jews of North America, South America, finally come home to Eretz Yisrael? I mean, it seems incredible now that it would happen. So we're going to talk a little bit about the enlightenment, and I think people don't realize how much it's influenced the way things are now. And I think, unfortunately, like I could say, like maybe around 80% of the Jewish people in the Western world and where are kind of stripped away from the Torah, and they have more of this secular Western education and view of the world than really a view of the world of like the Torah says. And I think this is going to be one of the things that Mashiach does. So we can look real quick. So some of the things that Mashiach will do when he comes, he's going to ingather all the exiles, so he's going to bring all the Jews home to Eretz Yisrael. And we have a Masorah that there's a Mashiach ben Yosef, a descendant of Joseph, and a Mashiach ben David, a descendant of King David. And will there be one? Will there be more? I don't know, but this is our Masorah, that there will be at least this Mashiach ben Yosef, and maybe his line, and a Mashiach ben David, and maybe his line. And they will do these tasks of ingathering the exiles. They're going to renew, the knowledge of Torah to the Jewish people. The Jewish people are going to reawaken and really learn the Torah like we did, in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, in times of Moses. Eretz Yisrael is going to be completely conquered, like in the days of Yeshua ben Nun. So the Jewish people will control all the land of Israel, and then each Jewish family is going to get a portion of the land of Israel. So now it's kind of like the Israeli government is more of like a socialist government, and there's not really so much individual ownership of the land. I think I've read somewhere it was only like 7% is privately owned. But really the Torah says what Hashem promised every Jewish person is that their family will actually inherit acres and acres, like massive portions of land that will be in their family, and that's going to be restored, like in the days of Yeshua ben Nun, as in the days of Joshua. And then there's going to be these 3 wars of Gog and Magog, and this is the conflict that we're kind of like building up to now. So the Enlightenment and like the scientific revolution, like these had a huge effect on the world. And it was like an explosion of, the scientific revolution was an explosion of knowledge and wisdom of how to harness the power of the physical world. And we see like in the ancient world, like ancient Egypt in the times of Moshe and the times of Moses, they were renowned for kishu, for sorcery and magic. And magic in essence is using the dark side of the force, we talked about before, using these powers of Tuma to harness like a negative spiritual energy, not connecting them to Hashem, but kind of like a hacker, like a spiritual hacker with like a back door and hacking the code. And using this spiritual energy to affect the physical world. Whereas the side of Kedusah is what the Torah is teaching, like to learning the Torah and doing the mitzvos, it affects things in a positive way. It creates a positive spiritual flow, and it brings bracha into the world, it brings blessing into the world. And we see, everything grow, and there's plenty of food, and we see less poverty, we see less sickness, and ultimately Mashiach is going to lead the world to a world of pure Kedusha, where eventually sickness and death can be eradicated. And there'll be plenty. There won't be hunger, there won't be famines. Even the weather, that we see the drastic weather is 90 degrees, high 90s, outside now for a week or so. But we're going to see a more tempered, more beautiful spring weather, beautiful fall weather, that perfect balance between the hot and the cold. And that's the world of Kedusah. That's the world where we're bringing bracha and blessing into the world. So Mashiach is also he's going to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, he's going to rebuild the temple, and the temple will be a focus point where the Shekhinah of Hashem, this infinite being, will be physically manifest in the world. And people can go to the Beis HaMikdash and they'll see the pillar of cloud, pillar of smoke by day and the pillar of fire by night, and they'll say, there is Hashem. And the presence of Hashem, this infinite being, will be felt much more in the world, and Kedusha will be felt much more in the world. All right, so the Enlightenment was kind of like the opposite of that. The Enlightenment, really what it's called, the age of enlightenment, age of wisdom and knowledge. So it was an explosion of knowledge in the scientific realms, but in morality, it's kind of been a corrosion of that. So, interesting thing. So in 1543, Nicholas Copernicus, he came up with his book on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres. So this was like a massive perception change in the world, where he's analyzing the orbits of the planets and the sun, and he's saying that instead of what they thought of the sun going around the Earth, that the Earth is actually orbiting around the sun. So I don't know. I mean, however Maisa Bereshis is, however these orbits are, that's the way Hashem created it. And in essence, it doesn't really change so much from our perspective, because even if the Earth is orbiting the sun, from our perspective here on the Earth, where we're living at the time, I don't know, if there's a colony on Mars one day, it may change, but from our perspective, the sun's rising in the east, it's setting in the west, and it really doesn't matter which way these orbits are. But Copernicus really changed the perception of the world to show that the Earth is orbiting the sun. And at the time, I guess it was shocking to some people, and I guess I don't know if it weakened the emunah of the belief of the Maisa Bereshis, of the creation, but these things started chipping away at people's emunah, chipping away at their connection to Hashem. So the scientific revolution is a breakthrough in mathematics, physics, astronomy, biology, chemistry. And as we said before, it's the Eis Das Tov Ra. So the knowledge can be used for good. There's great things. There's great engineering, these bridges, making it easier for people to get places, cars instead of carriages, trains, planes, spaceships, drones, I don't know. But so it can be used for the good. We can have great farming combines that can make the work easier and create more food for everybody. So the technology can be used for good, or chas v'shalom, it can be used for more destructive things. So also a big breakthrough in the scientific revolution was Isaac Newton coming up with the laws of motion, universal gravitation, and they began to just understand and analyze the physical world better. Those breakthroughs in microscopes, more powerful telescopes, and we can begin to see the microscopic wonders of creation and the macroscopic wonders of creation, the Shemayim, the heavens, the planets and the suns and the stars. And it opened up the scientific revolution, this so-called age of enlightenment. It just opened up people's view and perception of the world. So a person that's not taught too much about in public schools, which is interesting, but had a huge effect on the Western world and on the Enlightenment, was Francis Bacon. So he wrote a book called New Atlantis in 1626. And it's interesting because it seems somewhat of a blueprint for America, for the founding of America, or an idea that the founders of America took on. So in his book, he called this country, and I think it was more South America. I think it was off of the coast of Peru. But I think the ideas here are some of the ideals that went into the founding of America. And he talked about this Solomon's house, which was kind of this secret society, and the country itself is called Ben Shalem. Now Shalem is the name of was the ancient name of Yerushalayim and Jerusalem, and here Ben Shalem would mean the son of completion. So it would be this utopia. These people were complete. They were complete. It was kind of this secret university. They did the sciences there. And this is an interesting quote from his book. He said, and this we do also. So this was the Solomon, the father of the Solomon's house, the leader of the secret society, was talking about how the secret society fit into their civilization.